Hi everyone, and welcome to my updated guide for the Patterns of Justice Tempest Rush Monk. This set originally came out in Season 19, it's the newest set for the monks. It's also the Hades gift in Season 28, and it got a decent buff in Season 28 as well. It was already one of the better builds in the game, but they bumped it up a bit, so now there's like a new reason to play it. It's a very strong, especially farming build, and it has a very nice, smooth playstyle for the spin to win lovers. So let's get into it. Here's the updated D3 planner that I made. I have it linked in the description along with the macro guide for the entire written format if you like that more. And down here you can also find the various setups for different activities. But I'm gonna go into them. So we start with a set. We have the Path of Justice Monk. This is a Tempest Rush set. It gives you basically infinite resources while channeling Tempest Rush. You have to synergize with Sweeping Wind. So you have to have this skill on your bar. It gives you all the runes and you get a bit of speed. And then you get these other effects. And when that is active and you are Tempest Rushing, your damage is increased. So this is how you deal most of the damage with that skill. There are some very powerful Tempest Rush buffs. Most importantly, the balance Diablo. So this is one of the first priorities to get in the season if you start out with the set. It gives you lots of extra Tempest Rush damage unconditionally, and even more damage against the bosses when they are alone. Then we have the bracers. So Sailor's Memento is another huge damage buff, 800% after hitting enemies with blind, freeze or stun. So usually this is done in a push with Blinding Flash, which you do on demand to release a big explosion with Tempest Rush Flurry, which is the cold rune. So you can stack up these up to 100 stacks. You see it here on the buff bar. Every second you get 5 stacks. If you channel this for 20 seconds, which perfectly overlaps with the timer for Convention of Elements, you can do a big explosion every 20 seconds with that. Or you can automate it with the One Kim Lao, which is the other item that we have in the setup here. Again, a huge damage buff to Tempest Rush, and it will also automatically cast Cyclone Strike. So this is the activator in speedruns in particular. So when you look at something like this setup here, instead of the Blinding Flash, you have the cold Cyclone Strike that freezes enemies automatically with the weapon combined. So depending on what exactly you are doing, the playstyle ranges from like very laid back and smooth to just kind of timed big explosions and you have to kite enemies together. But the Cyclone Strikes automatically blocking all the time also makes it quite easy to make a large pull. You just like, rush into the center, you never let go of the button, and then every 20 seconds, for example, you do a big explosion. Aside from this, the build has a few other gymnastic pieces. For example, the Squirt's Necklace is included in every variation of this because you cannot use Endless Walk in this build. You're always moving, so this is a no-go. So either you try to play around this a little bit, especially in speed farming, you can easily keep it up usually when you go at a fast pace and you have the Molten Wildebeest for the shields. Or even in push, you can try to, for example, use Serenity for the 4 seconds invulnerability, and then rush into the center when your Conventional Element cycle is coming to do the explosion with a few Squirt stacks. There's the Captain Crimson set. This is not a requirement, but it does help with basically everything. The resources, the cooldown, you have better Epiphany uptime that gives you a 50% damage reduction, which is very nice. So generally, I want to try to get the Epiphany uptime as high as possible. Early on at low paragons, you can also run with the Guardian set. I would say up to 2,000, 2,500 or so. You can replace Crimson with Guardian, and then later on you switch to this, which is just like a more smooth and more viable setup later on. In addition to that, there are other various like smaller damage or defensive choices. So here's the Unity setup, for example, which just gives you a double toughness. There is also a Zodiac setup. So this allows you to go with like way less cooldown reduction on your items, and instead, for example, roll more area damage for a push setup. And you can still keep up the permanent Epiphany, have way more Serenity uptime, etc. So if you are comfortable with lower toughness, this is an option. And there's also the Stone of Jordan version, which is something I would recommend on at least a higher end. You can use a Lightning Stone of Jordan and roll lightning everywhere on your gear. And despite running the Cold Flurry rune for Tempest Rush, you can profit from the lightning damage that you have on your One Kim Lao. So this weapon always comes with lightning, and this makes the Stone of Jordan setup quite powerful for this build because you have this free extra damage that comes with the ring. However, keep in mind that this setup in particular is relatively squishy, but more doable than usual because of the season theme buffs in Season 28. And the Season 28 theme in general also makes your life a lot easier. You're more tanky, and you're faster, you have a CC immunity. So for example, one thing you usually have to worry about is, for example, on this Unity setup where you don't have necessarily permanent epiphany, is that you can get vortexed or knocked back or feared. And this actually interrupts your channeling for the flurry stacks, so that you essentially lose your entire burst when you would otherwise release the flurry with the blind. There's one other distinction here, which is for farming. You can also actually run the lightning rune. So this is the electric field rune, which gives you a larger AoE and just allows you to just melt through enemies more easily, especially on the lower tiers. So for example, you see here in the background, I'm speedrunning these like 115s here right now, but this is with the cold rune. But if you go down something like 6 to 8 tiers or so, you can comfortably run those rifts way faster with the lightning rune. And you don't have to worry about letting go of Tempest Rush and stacking up the flurry. It's just like Tempest Rushing, everything dies. A very easy and chill build. So this is the setup here, the fast and low setup, and then there's the slow and high setup that has the cold version. And you try to protect your Squirt's Necklace with Serenity, but you can also like swap out a few things, like the mantra. It doesn't have to be this mantra, this is just extra damage and speed. There's also defensive mantras, for example. Lastly, for the passives, I already mentioned that they are usually the same. So we have Seize the Initiative. In this build, attack speed is a pretty good stat, and when you have this buff, you basically deal 30% more damage, because this is a multiplier to the damage done by Tempest Rush. Very good to have. Beacon of Etar is basically always included because of the cooldown dependency. You want to try to get as much Epiphany uptime as possible to protect yourself. And then there is some other various defensive or offensive choices. For example, near-death experience can be helpful if you struggle with staying alive, early on at least. Later on you can replace this for something like momentum for extra damage. We have Relentless Assault, which is very good for speed farming. This is a multiplier, so 20% extra damage is very powerful. And especially when the fights are short, you can reliably proc this. In a push, not so much, because of the one Kim Now always proccing the Cyclone Strike effect. And this builds a lot of crowd control resistance for enemies, and you can barely benefit from Relentless Assault in a push. So there you go with something like Guardian's Path or Harmony, or maybe some other offensive choice. There's also a bit of variation in which weapons you run in your second slot. So here, for example, you see the Pig Sticker. There's also a lot of people running with an Azure Wrath in a push. So both these work. In general, I believe the Pig Sticker is a bit better, partly because of its attack speed scaling that I mentioned, and also because it has an extra primary stat, and then the secondaries that are actually quite powerful, because these are also multiplicative damage boosts against beasts and humans. So usually I think this is the way to go. Depending on the rift that you get, it might be slightly worse or noticeably better than an Azure Wrath. And also in farming we have the Echoing Fury. You can see it here right now. I have the Echoing Fury on my bar, and it's permanently at 5 stacks. And again, this gives you extra 75% attack speed. That's a lot of damage for those Tempest Rush explosions, or just with the Lightning Rune, Tempest Rushing around and everything dies as soon as you get a few stacks. And finally, for the armor slot in the cube, this is also pretty open to what you want to use. So in general, something like the Mantle of Channeling is a pretty good choice. It gives you 25% damage and damage reduction. There's like a nice, like, in between offense and defense. We have the Stone Gauntlets. Again, you are completely crowd control immune in Season 28 once you have unlocked the altar. And then you can run this no problem, which is very easy, which makes it very tanky in the push. But obviously you don't get extra damage. And potentially you can even run something like St. Archu's Gauge, or even like an Aquila Kiraz if you want, because you basically have permanent full resource all the time, so you don't have to worry about that. And for the gameplay, there is not really all that much to add, or that I haven't said already, but to go into a bit more detail, for the push in particular, you need to make sure that you release your Blinding Flash before you let go of Tempest Rush, because this is the way you activate the bracers, and otherwise you don't have the damage bonus. So you see this here, you do the boom on Cold Convention, and then you try to get more monsters, you try to wait it out without getting interrupted by a wormhole or something like that. And then you go in again, for example, with Serenity, you can press it during the physical COE cycle, go in, get some squirt stacks like that, do the blind, and then the explosion, and repeat. And then you like slowly drag the enemies around. Don't try to like finish off like individual elites or something like that, Your strength here is that you can make large pulls on the go. So you slowly drag everything through the rift. Obviously, if you want to push very high, you need to have like a pretty good open map so we can actually make those pulls. But this is not such a problem these days anyway. And for speed farming, everything is a lot simpler. Either you play with the cold version again, and you just do like small booms. You don't have to go for like 100 stacks every time. Just do whatever, you know, is necessary, so to say. Or you play the lightning variant where it's literally just like hold down the button, spin to win basically. One last thing to be aware about is that, for example, when you click pylons like this, you also lose your flurry stacks. So you always want to do that right after a boom, and then, you know, keep stacking again for the next boom. And also, for example, when you click doors, the same problem happens. So when you go into Ruins of Culvers, you're going to have a bad time on a push. But it's not really such a huge problem. It's just something to remember. And also, there is a chance that you can lose your flurry stacks without getting interrupted or anything like that, which is a bug that happens when you have too much attack speed and you turn your character too fast. So this can sometimes interrupt the Tempest Rush stacking and you lose your stacks. So you also gotta be aware, for example, when you have a speed pylon, you have a lot of extra movement speed and it's very easy to lose your flurry stacks. And in those cases, you want to try to do like very slow, big turns with your mouse cursor far away from your character. Because if you have it too close to your character, you might do fast turns and this can break the streak. And this also concludes the guide. Personally, I quite enjoy POJ Tempest Rush, so I'm excited to play that again. It is probably slightly better than the Inner Monk now, and a tiny bit behind the Wave of Light Monk when it comes to farming. So it's overall in a really good spot in my opinion. I hope you enjoyed this video here. Subscribe for more and see you guys next time.